The planet is heating up.
The oceans are becoming filled with plastic.
Change starts now. Change starts now.
We're on a countdown
To zero waste. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast. Here's your host, Laura Nash.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zero Waste Countdown podcast and radio show. Today, we're speaking with Matt Daigle from Rise. You can find his website. It's called buildwithrise.com, and he's the leading online authority in sustainable home improvement. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you have a company called Rise. Can you tell me a little bit about the company?
Sure. So Rise is essentially an online platform and community where homeowners can meet and essentially learn more about sustainable home improvement. So we essentially arm them with resources, whether that's inspiration through photos or information about products, even rebates and incentives, everything they need to essentially have a home that is more sustainable in every way.
So does that mean incentives like state by state?
Yeah, state by state or province by province. As far as we know, we're the only site in North America right now that has all rebates and incentives for all provinces and states across North America. So typically these come from municipalities or utilities, primarily utilities. And so if you just basically tell us which state or which province you live in, we can then serve up all the rebates that apply to you.
Wow, that must be a lot of work because I know with the flip-flopping of different government parties, especially in my province of Ontario, the incentives were like changing all over the place, right, with the new government. So that must be a lot of work to keep up on those, I guess.
It is. I think there's some rebates that have been in there for some incentives that have been in there for quite some time and haven't really changed. There are other incentives, though, that are changing almost quarterly or at least biannually. And so it does require some effort, but it is a good traffic source for us in getting folks to our site and getting engaged.
Do you sell things as well, or is it more like you're advertising services and products for other companies?
Yeah, so up until just a couple months ago, actually, it was essentially focused on building out an audience. So we essentially created mounds and mounds of content around sustainable home improvement, researched various products that are available to you. Now, we've really grown up as being an agnostic source, an objective source for homeowners. So we really are working to become the authority in online and sustainable home improvement. So for the most part, up until a couple months ago, we were giving just objective information with some examples of manufacturers that offer this. But now we're actually starting to work with manufacturers where they can have a profile on our site. They can upload products and projects where their products have been featured. And just because homeowners have been just asking, right? Like if we're telling a homeowner to go and buy LED bulbs, the next step is, okay, I'm sold on LED bulbs. Now tell me all about the manufacturers that carry them and where I can buy them. So we actually just started doing that.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you can kind of look at the different providers. And do you provide information on like whether those companies are sustainable or not? Is that a thing as well?
Yeah. So that's actually something that's sort of in the works for us. The companies that we're currently working with have essentially met our criteria for sustainable companies. That said, though, kind of a future state for us is going to be evaluating these companies on what they do, and that can be in a variety of ways. It could be from their manufacturing process to their packaging to how they treat their employees and social responsibility and these types of things. So these are all things that we're keeping in mind, and that is a future state for us.
That's really great. There's so many things to look at, especially upstream. So, you buy something at the store, but then there's this whole world behind the product that you can dive into. And that is sometimes difficult to find. And like you're saying, like, let's say I go to Home Depot and I have 2 light bulbs in my hand and they're from totally different companies. Like one of them might be doing really good things for the environment and one of them might be absolutely terrible. How do I tell? Right. So,
yeah. And typically the way we've kind of looked at that is we look at all of these things as benefits for the homeowners, and we've kind of split up the, this, I think it was about 10 benefits that we measure, but it kind of boils down to three main benefits, which are health, wealth, and the planet. So whether they benefit the homeowner's health, so obviously products that aren't toxic or harmful or don't emit VOCs or any sort of toxins for the home's occupants, products that and materials that help the homeowner's wealth, so helping you save money through its use, and then through the benefits for the planet, obviously reducing our footprint through the use of these products. So that's essentially how we've looked at it today.
Did you say VOCs?
VOCs, yeah.
What are those?
So volatile organic compounds. So there's a lot of products and materials that we buy today, and that they come with a boatload of chemicals and toxins that that become then present in our environment, and we have to be very mindful of those things because unfortunately through the years, products and materials that have made it into the home we think are safe for us, but they aren't always safe for us. And that's one of the things that we look at is the health of the occupants.
Yeah, so like the off-gassing of laminate flooring or something, or paint, like stuff like that?
Things like that, yeah. So there's a lot of, especially finishes, is where we typically find a lot of VOC. So cabinetry, so any sort of millwork in the home.
Oh, really?
Those are typically, there's very high levels of formaldehyde are typically found in those. So there are alternatives to that, and they don't cost more. And then there's obviously finishes. So anytime where you see like a wood finish or any sort of paints, there's other things also that off-gas in different ways that you can't see. For example, different types of insulation. Some traditional spray foaming methods or even some older fiberglass insulation, can off-gas for years. It's good to make people aware of these things because you kind of don't know what you don't know.
I just had one question though. Spray foam,
Sure.
Does that release VOCs? Like spray foam insulation?
It does. Spray foam is getting better and better as the years go by and as the chemical composition of spray foam evolves. It is getting better. During the installation process is where the biggest dangers really are. That's why you see the folks who install spray foam, they have full suits and breathing apparatus just to make sure that they are not breathing in those chemicals. So it is a product that comes from the petrochemical industry. And the other big thing with spray foam is it has a huge footprint on the environment. And that's actually through its insulation. When you install spray foam, you have to use these blowing agents. And these blowing agents traditionally have a very high global warming potential, or GWP number. And we're talking a number in the thousands. Now they're starting to develop spray foams that have a much lower GWP number, and you can get some as low as one instead of like thousands, which is a huge improvement. But it definitely is something that folks are increasingly mindful of. I just got a call from our videographer the other day, and he's doing some efficiency improvements to his home, and he's got 3 young kids under the age of 4, and he just calls me up out of the blue and said, the only thing he asked me is, got one question for you. I really want to put spray foam in my basement. Is it safe for my kids? When spray foam is installed, it also has to off-gas at least for 24 hours. I believe the EPA recommends up to 72 hours for off-gassing. So if you basically have to leave your home for that amount of time, but after that, it does become inert, and so there shouldn't be any off-gassing after that. Fiberglass is one that we've seen where off-gassing kind of happens later, for years, and that's just kind of installed in your walls. But that's a product that also has a very high level of formaldehyde traditionally. Some newer fiberglass insulations, though, have mitigated that with other binders.
Yikes! I think that's what I have because that's like the traditional pink fluffy stuff.
Yeah, and those so there are some better varieties of that now. So when I say fiberglass insulation, that's not all fiberglass insulation. It's traditionally speaking, and so stuff that you might have installed 10 years ago would probably have that. But today, like some of the stuff that you get at Home Depot, most of the time will be safe.
Oh, good. Well, I just built my home 2 years ago, so hopefully it's safe. But someone was telling me to do spray foam, and I didn't really know much about it, and I didn't end up doing spray foam. So it's interesting. It's interesting to hear about that. The other thing that I'm looking for is like a reusable furnace filter, because if you have a furnace, if you're listening, you will know what I'm talking about with those like big filters that you have to change every couple months, or else your furnace really doesn't work very well. My next kind of like zero wasting my home journey will be to get a reusable, washable filter instead of having to throw those out. Do you have those on your website?
Filters, we don't talk about filters all that much. We talk a lot about air purification. We also talk about HRVs, and furnaces in general are starting to date themselves. Like there are much more efficient heating solutions out there now. And just with filters, it's just, I guess the only thing I would really add is make sure you select a very good quality filter that filters out as much of the air as possible, because especially if you don't have an alternate mechanical ventilation system in your home, that is because that's really the air that you're breathing in that's just being recirculated. And also making sure that not only your filter is up to date and it's clean and all that, but also your ducts. If your ducts haven't been clean in several years, that's just air that's it's riddled with whatever from over the years. So that's something that's important as well.
Yeah, we have an HRV system and then a heat pump so that it heats and cools.
Oh, nice.
But only until minus 15 Celsius. So I do have propane that has to kick in if it's colder than minus 15, which in Canada it does get to. But for the most part, we just rely on the heat pump, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah, and that's what our site really aims to do, is to kind of point you in the right direction. And so for a lot of homeowners, like this stuff it's a lot to take on. It's so a lot to learn, and there's so much, research that you have to do, and it shouldn't have to be that hard. It should be really, really easy to have a home that is just better for the environment, better for your pocketbook, and better for your health. So that's really what we aim to do at Rise.
Yeah, it's really hard to find contractors that do care about sustainability or the environment, because when I built my house, that was not an issue. Like I had an issue with, the construction workers are dropping cigarette butts everywhere and their lunch garbage, and that's my land. I just mentioned, make sure they clean up the cigarette butts, because I don't want to live in a place that has cigarette butts all over the yard. And it was like, I can't do that. That's what the contractor said to me. He's like, I can't do that. And I'm like, well, you got to, because, I'm not going to live in a trash landfill, after you guys are done. It was just this point of tension between us a little bit that, a lot of stuff was getting thrown out, and some of the stuff, I don't know how sustainable it was, but when you're building a home, you're often in a hurry, maybe not all the time, but there usually is a bit of a hurry to it if you're paying for the builder's mortgage and whatnot. So, it would be nice to have more resources when it comes to this stuff, because it is a big part of our carbon footprint is where we live, right? So, you're going to start telling us about your company and how it started and all that stuff, right?
I can do that now. My journey with this started early 2014. So quite some years ago, around the same time, my wife and I purchased our first home together. We had this goal of renovating the house pretty well as quickly. So we bought this house as a fixer-upper, and we wanted to move into the house, but at the time we were expecting our first daughter. And so we were it's kind of the mad dash, like you said. Sometimes you're in a rush to finish these things, and we were trying to get into the house as quickly as possible, but still have a beautiful home. And so we renovated the place for 6 months, moved in, and just a month after that, our first daughter Audrey was born. And for the most part, the house looked great. It was maybe 85% done, and it looked great, but. And my wife happens to be an interior designer, so she made sure of that. She made sure that it looked really nice and it was functional. But at the end of the day, I picked up my first power bill, and then I realized that it hadn't changed from the beginning of the renovation. And here we are. We had just invested over 6 figures into this place, and our power bill doesn't look any different. And so to me, it was like a total fail. We missed the boat somewhere. And now that we have a newborn, I have all these new questions, because for me, having your first kid, makes you start to think about the future a lot more, and what you're leaving behind for them, and our collective footprint as a family. So I have all these questions. I go online. I don't, I come from the tech sector. And so I obviously always gravitate online for answers, and I didn't find anything. The resources that were out there were extremely technical and confusing, or very opinionated. And I thought maybe we could make a company out of this. And because I was just an average homeowner like everybody else. And so that's essentially what Rise, that's the problem that Rise is looking to solve, is how can we make sustainable home improvement, really built into the DNA of home improvement, so that it becomes so seamless and easy for any homeowner to have a home that's going to benefit their health, their wealth, and the planet. So
that's awesome. Yeah, having kids does make a big difference. And of course, it doesn't have to. Like, you do not have to have kids to care about the environment. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But for me, it was a catalyst. That's when I started looking into BPA and toxins and packaging and different foods, because I was like, I'm not going to be responsible for messing up my child in those sorts of ways. So I just hit the books. Like when I was pregnant, I was just reading and reading and reading nonstop. I went and got some of my old university textbooks of like psychological infant and childhood development, and was just like learning everything I could. And I've heard actually from other guests on the show that was their aha moment to either start a company or to be more sustainable, is they have this little child that they're supposed to take care of, and they start to look around and realize that maybe it's not the safest or healthiest environment, and then, look for positive changes. So I do hear that, that children are often catalysts, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, they absolutely are. It's almost as though we think we can't, ourselves is not enough of a reason, but when you have kids, it's like that extra incentive to be like, okay, like what's really going on here? And I'm very grateful that all of that happened, and now I can actually feel a lot better about the stuff that's going into our home, and hopefully the resource that we've built so far is helpful for other homeowners who want to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are a certified B Corp, is that right?
We are, yeah. As of May 2019, we became a certified B Corporation. And that was a really exciting thing. I'm sure your listeners are probably familiar with B Corps, but if not, B Corps sort of exist in between a for-profit company and a non-for-profit company. So B Corps typically focus on the triple bottom line, so people, planet, and profit. And so instead of making all your decisions based on the financials and the numbers, you make them based on the financials, yes, but also people within the company and outside the company, and the planet. So whether or not the things that you're doing are benefiting the planet at the same time. And so that was really that was something that I knew from I knew 5 years ago that we would go through that hurdle. Like, it was kind of a goal of mine personally to become a B Corp. I was inspired by folks like Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia, who has kind of been a trailblazer on that end. And actually, we recently also joined 1% for the Planet, so we now give back 1% of our revenue to environmental nonprofits. So that's also exciting as well. And that actually also came out of Patagonia, funny enough. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And I think that you said a hurdle. Like, it is difficult to get that certification, is it not, to be a certified B Corp?
It's not an easy thing. So there's about 3,000 companies that exist worldwide today that are certified B Corps, and that number is growing, and it's really, really nice to see. I was lucky to go to the annual Champions Retreat in Los Angeles in September that just passed, and it's so inspiring to see all these companies come together, and just you're like instant family when you go to these things. And you're right, the process took for any company that's planning to do this, the process takes anywhere from 6 months to a good year of time to go through all the questions. And a lot of it also is formalizing, for an earlier company, for a newer company, might be a little bit easier to do this because you're creating documentation or even company policies that didn't really even exist before. For a company that's been around for a while, you do have to kind of go back, look at your current policies, and maybe adjust them accordingly. But I would say that's probably how long it takes to get through that process.
Yeah.
We took up a small space in downtown Fredericton in New Brunswick, and we essentially renovated it to LEED and WELL standards. So we kind of dog food it, as you would say, like we practice what we preach, so to say. And so a lot of the things that the finishes and the materials that were used in the construction of the space were all vetted and researched, and essentially we chose the best of the best in that regard. Just, from things like, instead of introducing a brand new flooring in the space, we simply ground down the existing concrete and polished it. And now it's super, super nice and comfortable. And to other things like having a living wall. So we have this gigantic plant wall where, it's kind of like the big thing that you see when you walk into the space. And it, you can tell it makes a difference in people's day to day and things to keep people happy.
Oh, that's very cool. Did you say that you're in New Brunswick?
We are, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that you're Canadian.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Me too. Cool. Yeah. A lot of our listeners are American, and we do have a few hundred Canadian listeners, and we broadcast now on Queens County Radio in Nova Scotia, which I guess isn't too close to you in New Brunswick. What is the environmental situation like out in New Brunswick? Is there a zero waste store there? Are people sustainable? Like, what do you see out there?
I'd love to, I'm from here, kind of born and raised here. And as much as I want to say that we are industry leading and I want to say good things about our province, I guess it wouldn't be an accurate picture of reality. So we are a bit behind when it comes to things like waste management. And for the most part, I should say that's for our city. There are other cities like Moncton, which is a couple hours away. They're doing much better on that front than we are. But the climate here it's becoming more and more relevant for people. Like, so Fredericton is sort of divided by the St. John River. And every year, every spring, we get some pretty nasty floods, and especially in the last few years. Which
my gosh, yes.
Has been uncommon for us. And so people are, I think that's actually starting to paint a bit of a picture for folks and making it really relevant, because a lot of people are having to be displaced by this. People are losing their homes. It's pretty serious. And so on that side, I think people are starting to wake up a bit. We're starting to see, I just saw a Tesla drive by that there's more of those things. But, from the waste side, I feel like we could do a lot better. One of the things you mentioned earlier was when you were building your house, and, construction waste is a big one that we talk a lot about at Rise. Because, especially when you're building a house or even renovating creates a lot of debris. And you want to make sure that stuff is recyclable, because it is. About 90% of that debris or that construction waste can be sorted and recycled if you have the right facilities. And unfortunately, we don't in Fredericton. But there are other cities and municipalities. Like I was in Minneapolis for a video shoot last year, and a gentleman was renovating a home, and he actually tore down most of it, kept the foundation, and all the materials from the old home, because it was in such bad shape, they were still able to salvage 96% of those materials and divert them to be recycled. And
that's awesome.
So that's great. And I should say, like, recycling is not always the answer. You want to just recycle more. Like, you just want to, you actually want to recycle less. You want to have less waste in general, right?
Yeah.
Even though you can recycle, that's all good. One of the interesting things that we are starting to see as well is we get a ton of our traffic comes from people interested in prefab homes. And prefab homes are essentially one of the answers to construction waste on site, especially for new builds. Because new builds, you get your plot of land, and then contractors come in, they bring in their materials, and, they build the house as they go. And
a lot of the work is done there, right? So there's like scraps and cuttings and nails and all this stuff, right?
Exactly. And so a lot of that ends up in the landfill. And prefabricated homes are essentially the answer to that, where a house is built in part or in chunks offsite in a warehouse. And that's actually a really great way to mitigate a lot of the on-site waste that happens. And even, building it offsite, they're able to reuse a lot of the materials that they take from one house and reuse it on another house. And it's just a much more efficient way to utilize construction waste. And so that's actually something that we've seen a tremendous uptick in traffic in people interested in prefab homes.
Wow, that's awesome. I've never thought about that before. I just got really excited when you said that because there was so much just garbage from just doing the work on site. That could
it's a really interesting industry. And some of these prefab homes, like, you can get them at different stages, like some stages where they're just shipping in panels and then they assemble the panels in a few days. And then and then you're kind of left to finish the inside, where some are almost completely finished and they're almost like modular, and where they just ship chunks of the home and then, kind of screw them together in a few days and it's done. So it does shorten the time to assemble the house on site, and obviously reduces the waste there. The only big one there is transportation, making sure you can get it to the site. But other than that, it's just a great way to mitigate a lot of that waste.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. So if we were to give listeners and myself, of course, just sort of one takeaway, if we need to do some renovations on our home, what are the top few items that we should be looking at to make the most environmental impact?
That is a loaded question.
I guess it would kind of depend. Like if you live in Canada, like you need to have good windows or else all your heat's going to go out, right? Or maybe it's a furnace. I don't know.
Yeah, if you're looking at the environment and like the operational footprint of a house, and so on a daily basis, how much energy are you using? And I would say efficiency is paramount. So having a home that's incredibly well insulated is with proper mechanical ventilation is by far one of the best things to do. And there's so many more benefits to doing that beyond just saving electricity, lowering your footprint, and helping the environment. But there's other benefits like healthy indoor air quality or comfort, just general comfort inside the home. So one type of home that we hear a lot about on our website is passive house. And passive house is a building standard that originated out of Germany. And it's now made its way to North America, and a lot of homeowners are gravitating towards this type of building. But it's really a simple way to build when you think about it. You essentially build a wall that's much thicker than a typical wall. So if you're in Canada, you're going to be in a much colder climate. So we typically see wall thicknesses anywhere between 18 and 24 inches wide. And, so you compare that to the typical 6-inch studded wall that, most builders build to today. It's quite a departure, but essentially what you're doing is hyper insulating this shell of a house and then having a very, very good HRV system to constantly bring fresh air in and stale air out. The impact of doing that is, I can't even describe it, just the comfort that you feel in stepping into a passive house, but also, lowering your energy bill. If you ever think of putting solar on your house, it would obviously lower the size of the system that you would need. A lot of these passive homes are heated with what they call a toaster heater. It's literally has the same heat output as a toaster. That's how small the heating load is necessary for these homes. And you can even leave, if you're in Ontario, like you could leave your passive house 2 months in the winter, not have the heat turned on, and your pipes wouldn't freeze. So that's how well it retains heat. And I think that's probably one thing that I would suggest is focus on efficiency, because it also helps you do other things down the road, where if you're looking to upgrade to things like solar, it drastically reduces the cost of your solar array and maybe even eventually will allow you to live off-grid.
Well, this has been really awesome, Matt. So thank you for coming on the show and teaching us a little bit about home improvements.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Awesome. That was Matt Daigle from Rise. You can find his website, buildwithrise.com. He is the leading online authority in sustainable home improvement.
Change starts now.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast.